Let me start with this. So I'm going to do a broad sweep overview of education and, quote, Indian assimilation. Now, why is that even a word? Why is it a topic? Well, if you go back all the way to the 1600s, 1700s, and as you get into the 1800s, we fought the last of the Indian Wars in the late 1800s. Prior to that, there was just a massive decimation of all the tribes and Indian peoples in North America, all the way from Canada all the way to Mexico. A lot of anthropology scholars think that the population of Native Americans in the time over that wide America's country was about, and this is their best guesstimate, some estimates 5 to 6 million, some as few as a couple million. By the end of the late 1800s, there are estimates that say that was as low as 250,000. Now, it's hard to grasp, what happened to all the people? Where did it all go? We know what happened to the land. There was a massive land grab from expansion. And I'll give you one example of the differential in land. In the 1600s, if you look up the map of upstate New York, you'll see the Oneida tribe nestled right in between the Mohawk, and the Cayuga, the Onondaga, and the Seneca. That's the Iroquois Nation. Now, the Oneida, it's estimated that the Oneida land holdings alone were over 6 million acres. That's my tribe, the Oneida tribe, 6 million acres. By the late 1800s, that was down to 34 acres, 34. The last vestige of the Oneida Nation, the Oneida tribe in upstate New York, was literally in the hands of a few families. The debate was in government circles, in Congress, and it's well documented, what to do with the, quote, Indian problem. And the problem was, as settlers and congressional forces saw it, that we had two choices. We can annihilate what's left over or assimilate what's left over of the population. And believe it or not, there was a rabid debate as to which would be the better course. Had it not been for Indian reformers in the East and government watchdogs in the East, some scholars fear that it would have been annihilation. And nevertheless, they said, well, morally, ethically, principally, we probably ought to keep these people. So there was an effort made for assimilation. And if you read any of the modern textbooks on assimilation and Indian policy in the United States, you'll see that what has taken place is an effort to bring the larger population of Native Americans into the fold of the American experience. Now, what's the American experience? Well, who knows what that is? At the time, in the 16, 17, 1800s, the American experience was thought to be prodigious land, ownership of the land, and farming. Now, again, if you look at all the Indian tribes, there's no such thing as a contract to own the land. Nobody owned the land. The native thought, the native philosophy was that, well, God owned the land. How could we own something that God owned? We're just a sojourner and we're borrowing it. And so there was a lot of conflict early on regarding that. And that's kind of the backdrop of why education is such a big deal. The early reformers and advocates for Native American peoples said that, well, the only way we can do this assimilation is through education. Now, on the surface, it made complete sense. How are you going to learn to survive in a, quote, civilized society if you're not educated to the degree of civility that they want you to have? Now, I'm gonna read just a clip, and then I want to share some screenshots with you, and I'm going to gradually do a stepwise walk through Carlisle Indian Industrial School, which was the first government-sponsored Indian school in America. Then we're going to go to a Bethany Indian mission where my mother went to school, and it's kind of the flower child, if you will, of the missionary movement in Indian education. And then we'll end up with me at the end. So I've got a broad historical sweep, but kind of a family story that kind of traces the development of education. My grandfather, Levi Elm, I have two grandfathers. One, my natural born grandfather, Isaac Archichet, and my step grandfather, Levi Elm, and my biological grandmother all went to Carlisle. Levi Elm enrolled in 1885. Now, Carlisle was kind of the brainchild of an Army cavalry captain named Richard Henry Pratt. And Pratt's first experience with Native American tribes was in the plains fighting Indians. Okay. And he was tasked with taking Comanche, Kiowa, Arapaho prisoners of war from the mid-states all the way to Florida as prisoners. They were shackled and sent there because of their involvement with uprisings and wars. While at Fort Marion, Florida, Captain Pratt decided, let's try an experiment. He started having classes, teaching English, teaching various skills, talking with these Native American prisoners. And he went so far as to unshackle their legs and let them roam around. They got to the point where he let them walk in the Fort Marion township. And the villagers were kind of curious, and they'd watch this and they'd say, well, maybe we can have a little cultural interchange. And so it was very interesting. And kind of in the high society of Fort Marion, Florida, there was a ladies' club that got the prisoners to teach them how to shoot bows and arrows. It was kind of a nutty approach to kind of cross-cultural learning. But the idea that Pratt had was maybe Indians can be educated. That was the question. Are they educable? Now, understand that his motto at the Carlisle Indian School was this: kill the Indian, save the man. That was his personal motto. And now what he meant by that, and it wasn't, if you study Pratt, it wasn't out of avarice. He really believed that in order to save the Indian person, the man, you had to wash out, to baptize them in all things civil, in all things un-Indian and white, and that's what he did. Let me show you the cover page of this book here, if I can get it open, which I can't. Well, I'll show it to you later. I just want to read you something that the background of Pratt. So Carlisle Barracks itself was founded in 1757. They call it the Old Barracks. It had a distinguished military history of Indian fighting tactics that were taught there. General George Washington assembled the Carlisle, the largest force commanded during the war. And so it got its start in the military. Carlisle Barracks did. And they used to have a cavalry class on the tactics on how to kill Plains Indians. And through a turn of events, and irony of it is that later in 1879, Captain Pratt pleaded with the federal government to A, let the prisoners go at Fort Marion, but B, further than that, is there a way I can get a permanent institution to teach these Indians the art of civilization? And there was a big, long debate. And finally, they said, well, sure, maybe we can try that. And so he moved 17 of the prisoners from Fort Marion to Carlisle Indian School and began the school in 1879. Subsequent to that, in the following year, he went out to the various tribes in the plains in the West and actually recruited students to come to the school. And he talked to the various Indian chiefs and said, look, you're not going to survive unless your children know the ways of civilization and know English language. And many of the chiefs and the tribal elders said, well, yes, you have a point. And so not half-heartedly, but with consternation and a little bit of misgiving, they began to send their children to the Carlisle Industrial Indian School. I've often wondered what my great-great-grandparents were thinking when they sent Levi Elm and Isaac Archicott and Louisa Christian off to Carlisle. Because at Carlisle, the minimum stint of education, you had to sign a contract, stay there 5 years. You didn't go home, you stayed there for 5 years. The age of the children that we can find anyway recorded from 6 years all the way to the 20s, 30. There's a few 30-year-old kids in there. My grandfather was 18 years old. We're talking about Levi Elm now. 18 years old. When he got to Carlisle in September of 1885, he was put in the second grade. Most of the students who attended Carlisle were assigned to the lower grades, second and third grade. None of them, and some of them did speak English, but none of them were put in advanced stages, advanced classrooms. Most of the students did not finish the full 5 years. And the latest figures I've seen of the more than 10,000 students that went to Carlisle, only about 650 to 750 actually finished and got a diploma. Well, that's pretty dismal. The first graduating class, remember it was open in 1879, the first graduating class of 14 students was in 1889, so 10 years to get the first full class. Let me go on to what am I doing here? I'm lost. Oh, okay. So at Carlisle, the idea was basically reading, writing, and arithmetic, plus a skill. Now, the skills were, well, let's put it this way. What do you think the most important civilizing skill would have been in the late 1800s? Okay, let's go with reading, writing, arithmetic. But other than that, what could be advanced as a skill to help somebody survive, regardless of their skin color or their ethnic or cultural background? Well, farming for the men, and for the women would have been cooking, sewing, cleaning, and general housework. Maybe work in the laundry. For the men beyond farming, there was tinsmithing, brickyard working, harness shop, and also the laundry. So these were the typical vocational avenues that the students went down. They did have formal classrooms, and I'll show you a few of those in a minute. But I want to show you something that when I'm researching for my next book, and when I saw this picture that I'm going to show you, I was all things all at once. I was angry, I was sad, I was laughing, and I didn't know really how to take this. But here's a picture in the early 1900s, and it's the drama class. Of all the things that the young Indian students needed in Carlisle in the late 1800s, it was how to do drama. So here is two students depicting, can you see that? You see what I'm showing you? Pilgrims. Now, and you know, decked out in the pilgrim hat and the whole 9 yards. And I saw that and I said, "What? How crazy is that?" Here you have students coming to Carlisle to get an education for civilization, and you don them in pilgrim garb and have them put on a pilgrim play. Silly, absolute silliness. And I'm going to show you some other pictures. Actually, I'm going to show them to you right now. So, Tiffany, if I lose you, get me back.
Yes, I'm right here.
I'm going to do a screen save there.
Okay.
Here. And I'm just going to show you. So leading up to Carlisle, we've got this thing that takes place. Indian land for sale, get a home of your own, easy payments, perfect title, possession within 30 days. Fine lands in the West, all that stuff. Well, where'd they get that land to sell? Yeah, from the Indians. Where'd the 6 million acres go from the United Tribe? It didn't go to this land grab, that was out west, but it went to companies, farmers, and the Ogden Land Company back east, who took charge of all that land. And so they either just took it or they sold it literally for from 1 penny to 10 cents on the acre, and then sold it for dollars on the acre. Let me show you another picture here. This is kind of interesting. I got a lot of good pictures here, if I can find them all. Oh, here's my other favorite. Can you see this?
Yes.
Blow it up. Can you see that?
Yeah.
It's the Carlisle Drama Club presenting the Greek play Orpheus. Now, how practical is that? That's, I think that's my grandfather right over here. No, I'm just kidding you. I didn't. Have any of you ever done a production of Orpheus? I doubt it. Maybe you have in high school. Now, let me show you, if I can, a little something I put together. And it's just a PowerPoint presentation, but it'll kind of keep the rest of the time on track. We've already talked about the Indian problem, the quote Indian problem, what to do with the Indians left over from the kind of annihilation phase. And in 1819, Congress actually passed what's called the Indian Civilization Fund. We put $10,000 in it for the purpose of, quote, civilizing all the Indians. The Bureau of Indian Affairs didn't get it started until 1824. 6 years later, we had the Indian Removal Act, which is exactly what it says. Let's get rid of all the Indians and put them on reservations somewhere. The Cherokee Trail of Tears is 1838, where they were removed. They're not the only tribe to have a Trail of Tears. Our tribe had theirs in the 1820s. Battle of Little Bighorn, or Custer's Last Stand, 1876. And and Wounded Knee, which everybody hears, is 1890. There's a legal case here I'm going to quote. It's called the Standing Bear case, which not too many people are familiar with, but look at this. Now, here's Pratt's motto: kill the Indian, save the man. Remember, my grandfather enrolls in 1885, right here. In 1879, we get the Standing Bear case. What is that all about? The Standing Bear case involves a Ponca Indian chief named Standing Bear in Oklahoma area. He was imprisoned along with members of his tribe because basically his land was wanted. And they removed him to somewhere in Kansas. Well, it was Fort Sill, I guess. At any rate, while he was there, his son died. Standing Bear wanted to take him back to the original Indian land in Oklahoma and bury him. And the U.S. government said, no, he can't do that. Well, he escaped with his child and the bones of his child, and he was rounded up by the cavalry, brought back, and put in a penitentiary. With the help of some reformers in the East, Standing Bear sued the U.S. government for a writ of habeas corpus. And a judge in the district court in Omaha said that, Standing Bear has a point. Indians are protected under the Constitution because they're people. Before that, Indians didn't have standing in any court because they were considered savages. It's the first case in U.S. history where Indians were considered people, not savages. And by making them people, they were allowed protections under the Constitution. Now, that's 1879. 1885, Levi Elm goes to Carlisle Indian School. In 1924 is the Indian Citizenship Act, where the United States declares all Native Americans to be citizens. So my grandfather lived in a period of time where he was not a person according to US law and finally became a person. He also lived during a time when he was not a citizen of the very land that he occupied, yet became an American citizen in 1924. It's just kind of an interesting look at, where we've been with Indian history. So the Oneida removal from back east, 1822, from New York to Wisconsin, they went down to 6 million acres. Now, if you look at the Indian reservation, the Oneida Indian Reservation in Wisconsin, it's exactly 65,400 acres. Why is it 65,400? Because 654 families were moved from Oneida, New York to Oneida, Wisconsin, and the current reservation is right outside by the airport, Green Bay Airport. And each family was allotted, they figured, 100 acres. So if you take 100 times 65,400, you get, or take 100 times 654. That's how you get the 65,000. Now, that land and reservation size finally got settled in the 1860s. About 100 years later, 99% of that land had been taken. My cousin, who happens to be one of the tribal attorneys, her lot in life and her mission was to try to get as much of that land back as possible. Now, then the way they did it was to sue for it. Now, they didn't kick the white farmers off. They had to buy it back, but they got some kind of settlement from the court that allowed them to be first in line to buy back all reservation lands that had been taken. So as I said, my grandfather, age 19, goes second grade, gets assigned the brickyard. And let me go forward a few slides and then come back. So here's his course, 1885. When he was there, and very, very soon after he got there, and this is from records from Richard Pratt himself, Levi Elm ran away from school with 2 or 3 other Indian boys from Oneida. Well, they were rounded up by the police and put in the stockade the next day, and they were detained. We know from the historical record in the school archives that his father, my great-great-grandfather, wrote a letter to the then Commissioner of Indian Affairs asking or demanding that Levi Elm be returned to Oneida. Richard Pratt refused and wrote a letter back to the commissioner saying he's incalcitrant, he's a bum, but he signed a contract and he has to stay here 5 years. I'll show you one of the letters here. Now, I hope everybody can see that. You see where it says 982? Shake your head if you see it, because I can't hear you. Okay. Where it says 982, if you read down the next block, it says name of the student, Levi Elm. Where's he from? The Green Bay Agency, Oneida Indian. It tells you when he was enrolled in 1885 in September, supposed to be there 5 years. He got discharged on June of the following year. Why? Can you see what it says in the next block? Worthless. So I don't know who wrote that paper. I'm guessing it was Pratt himself, because I've looked at the penmanship and it's pretty darn similar. It's not something that typically a teacher would fill out. This is an administrative form, and Pratt was the only administrator of the school. If you look to the right, the kind of pale colored paper there, it's another document very similar. Tells you when he went in, when he went out, but this time the cause of discharge is, what does it say? Unworthy. So he's worthless and unworthy, and that's basically the legacy of the Carlisle Indian Institute for him. Now, other students had a different experience. Remember that Jim Thorpe, he won the gold medal in decathlon and pentathlon in 1912. So he had a far different experience, but he had a later experience than my grandfather. Here's a typical Carlisle. These are actually pictures from the Carlisle archives. This is a combo, second and third grade, boys and girls. But look at their manner of dress. Look how they're dressed, and look at the teacher. And if you get real close, you can see some of the writing on the board. Almost perfect penmanship. Not something I inherited. Here's the drama club again, presenting Orpheus. Now, how's this for irony? You don't have the caption on here, but if you look at the historical archives, the caption is, these students are out of doors, and the matron is giving a lecture on nature. How ironic. Okay, you gather up all the Indian kids who live in nature, and you bring them here, you dress them up, as was the habit. I guess they looked like that. And now you're going to give them lectures about trees and grass and air and stuff like that. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it is kind of wacky. There is the prison, the Hessian guardhouse, right there. Now, 2 summers ago, I visited Carlisle, and because I wanted to see firsthand what my grandparents did and where they stayed, and I went into the prison, and it's here. There's no windows at all. It's made out of stone and these huge timbers. And if you ran away, you got put in prison. If you did certain things, get out of line, you got put in prison. Let's move forward to look at Margaret Archiquette. That's my mother, my biological mother. What was her educational experience in the assimilation kind of a system, the educational assimilation? Now, she didn't go to a government boarding school. Remember, by the time Levi Elm, her mother, and my great-grandfather came back from Carlisle, they had their government-sponsored experience. As my mother used to explain when I asked her when I was older, she said they didn't want her to go to the government school because they were bad. They preferred a missionary school, which was, quote, good. So she attended the Bethany Indian Mission School in Wittenberg, Wisconsin from age 4 all the way to age 12. Her training was in domestic skills, and according to her, she was a, quote, scrub lady. She learned how to sweep, she learned how to sew, she learned how to cook, she learned how to do those things, which most of the kids on the Indian reservation would have known how to do anyway. Now let's look at a little bit of her experience. So there's a mission before, and this Bethany Indian Mission School was set up by the Norwegian Lutherans. And I'll read you just something very quick here. There was a committee at the Luther Seminary in Madison, and there were objections raised as to whether they should actually put up the missionary school to serve these Indians or not. And here's some of the arguments that were put forth by the committee members. First, both the Missouri and Augustana synods had started Indian missions and had been compelled to give them up. Second, it's extremely difficult to establish a mission among Indian people who are so unsettled and nomadic. Third, it's difficult to find a man who is suited for such work, since he must make it his life's calling, must be willing to endure hardship, self-denial, and have the ability to learn the Indian language. Now, here's the kicker. The committee members stressed how important it was for children to get away from pagan influence and receive food, clothing, schooling away from home. Underscore away from home, because you'll notice the entirety of the Indian school movement was residential boarding school. We don't want the kids to be trained at home anymore. Let's take them to Carlisle, take them wherever. And it was all a residential system, away from the parents, away from tribal influence, away from cultural influence. They also mentioned, this is the committee now arguing whether they're going to do this. They also mentioned that the government had changed its attitude toward the Redskins, seemingly believing that it was cheaper to give them the gospel than to kill them. The committee finally arrived at a unanimous decision that the Norwegian Synod should have as its aim the starting of a mission among the Indians of northern Wisconsin. A petition to that effect was signed and delivered to their mission president. So what, and you can read in Native history in different books that the attitude of Congress, of early government, of early peoples really was, well, look, it cost, one congressman estimated cost more than $10 million to fight the Indians for 5 years. And then he said, well, what, we could take the same amount of money and half of that and educate the entire lot of Indians over the next 10 years. So that was the kind of thinking. Now there's Bethany Indian Mission. So it's there's the dormitory and classrooms. That has since been torn down, no longer exists. There's a high school on that Bethany Indian Mission. Now here's the students in 1921. T.M. Riken was the missionary, in fact, who was there, 1918, 1930. Who's that little girl right there in front? That's my mother. There's Riken. There's my mother. Now her sister attended also. Her name's Pearl. I'm pretty sure that's Pearl right here. I can't be 100%, but Pearl was 4 years older than Margaret. So that's little Margaret Kerstetter at age 4/5. I can never remember which it is, but pretty darn young. Wouldn't you agree to be going to a boarding school? Oop, I got ahead of myself. Okay. It's dated 1921. It's a souvenir pamphlet of the Bethany Indian Mission. If you Google it, you can pull it up. And if you read into it, it's got the enrollment in 1921. The top two names are Louise and Margaret Archicott, my mother and auntie. So she goes to school and does the reading, writing, arithmetic, and is trained as a, quote, domestic. She goes back to the reservation and lives there with her mom and dad and does farming, and eventually gets married. And you say, well, what would that have been like? Well, pretty darn hard. When was the Great Depression? 29th to 30, something like that. So she would have been, like many of our parents would have been, a Depression era teenager. And if you can well imagine, the Depression, as difficult as it was in the cities, was almost virtually unbearable on Indian reservations. There were typically allotments of food, clothing that never arrived. The system was rife with corruption. Indian agents would actually take food that belonged to the Indian people and sell it or keep it. So made for a very, very, very difficult time. Now, how does Margaret Kerstetter survive when she has her family? Well, first of all, I have a brother and a sister, and about 10 years older than I am. And her husband decided that he couldn't tolerate the reservation living, so he left. That leaves her with 3 kids alone, and she's trying to raise them. She has what he had on the Oneida Indian Reservation, was a little sundry store. Well, you couldn't make a living. I mean, it's like now, like the restaurants are closed during COVID. How do you make a living? You can't. Why? There's no economy. Why? Well, none of the Indians are working. Why? Because they don't have skills. Now what are we going to do? You wait around for the government handout, guess what? It never shows up. That's tough. That's called tough living. In order for her to survive, she decides to go from Oneida, Wisconsin to Brigham City, Utah. What's in Brigham City, Utah? A huge government Indian boarding school, another boarding school. Now, if you were to build a kind of the choicest jobs I want to have lists, 1 through 10, would an Indian put, I want to work for the Bureau of Indian Affairs as number 1? I got words for what I think about that. But there's no way on the planet. Guess what? She decides to take her family from the reservation all the way to Brigham City, Utah, which I don't know, it's probably 1,500 miles. Why? She got a job as a scrub lady in an industrial school working for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, where she made the sum total of 75 cents an hour. Whoa. I don't know how she did that. She raised 3 kids. She never drove a car. She was never educated past the 7th grade. The only education she had was at the Bethany Indian Mission. She was grateful for it. She never lamented it. She never said they treated her poorly. There were restrictions on language and culture, but it was a missionary school as opposed to the government school. So she saw that in a very different light. Inculcated into the students was a sense of education and survival. You got to keep learning. You got to work. She would always tell me when I was growing up, Johnny, you've got to get an education. I said, okay, well, yeah, Mom, I want to be a doctor someday. I said, well, I didn't mean that far, but that was her shtick. Education, education, education. So what happens? And I knew my grandfather, not very long, but I did know him. And I never heard him spoke a word English. He put me on his knee and smoke his pipe and sing Indian prayers. And he'd tell me that these were good hands. My hands were good hands, and they were strong hands. And, I say, well, I want to be a doctor. And he'd, kind of pat me on the back. What did I learn from Levi Elm? What did I learn from Margaret Archicott? Kind of a sticky, tenacious stick-to-itiveness, I think, that you keep going. My biggest dream when I was growing up in high school was to get out of that town and become a doctor, go to school. Now, quickly, we're going to go to, okay, so we've got Carlisle Indian Institute. We have the school at Wittenberg, the Bethany Indian Mission. And not, by my time, yes, there are still Indian students going to the Intermountain Indian School, one of the largest remaining schools in the country in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. There's still a few active Indian schools out there today. But none of them were colleges. None of them could get you into medical school. None provided anything more than read, write, arithmetic, and a basic trade. I didn't want a basic trade. I wanted something else. And my mom said, well, I don't know anything about college. Talk to your friends at school. So I did. I got accepted to the University of Utah. She gave me her entire life savings to go. That was $300. And I went. That was back when you take a whole year for almost $1,000. Remember that? Tuition was really low. My second week of college, you met with your college advisor. And I put on my form, pre-med major. So I drew the pre-med counselor. He was a chemistry professor. And I remember he had a group meeting. It's probably 20 kids in the meeting. He got up and said, he turned around and he looked at us. There was cookies and stuff like that to eat. Everybody's, grabbing as many cookies as they want, put them in their pocket. And he turned around and he looked at us. He's pointed just like this. I happened to be sitting in the front row and he pointed right at me. And he said these words, not a single one of you ever going to see the inside of a medical school. He turned around and he said, if anybody wants to see me privately, I've got a roster on my door. You can sign up. And he turns around and walks out. We're all stunned. We're going, well, wait a minute. I thought this was the advisor. He was the executioner. So I signed up. So I went in and he said, wait a minute. You're American Indian, aren't you? I said, yes, sir. He said, what tribe? And I told him he never heard of the Oneidas. He said, you got to talk to the Indian advisor. So he picks up his phone, calls the Indian advisor, yada, yada. I got a student here. You really got to talk to him. And okay. So I go over to the student advisor, who is a Navajo Indian, hair down to his waist, brilliant guy, a master's degree in social work up on the wall. And I told him what happened. He kind of chuckled a little bit, and he said, "Let me see your schedule." And then he says this. He says, the chemistry professor was right. We Indians don't do the hard sciences. Quote. Where's my book? Well, I said, we don't? I didn't know that. Now, being the resilient guy with all the lessons I've learned from my mom and grandfather, I shimmied up my chest and went to the registrar, and the Indian counselor said, I had signed up for a year-long chemistry, math, biology, and physics. He said, there's no way you're going to make that. You have to drop 3 out of the 4. Well, I dropped 2. I dropped math and physics. And I struggled the whole year, and I wasn't prepared. They were right, I wasn't prepared. I didn't have the kind of skill set necessary for that rigorous kind of academic study. So you know what I did? I changed my major. I went and floundered around for a whole bunch and decided, yeah, they're right. I can't be a doctor because we don't do the hard sciences. I went to work for IBM. Guess what? They use math at IBM. They use hard science at IBM. 10 years later, I decide, wait a minute. Something's wrong with this picture. So I decided I'm going to go back to I'm going to do the work that I have to do. I had enrolled in a PhD program that allowed me access to all the classes I needed for basically free. And I took them and I prepared myself over a period of 2 years. Yeah, it was a TA, that's why it was free. And I applied to some medical schools. And I said, well, the best school in America is that at the time was the Mayo Clinic. And I want to go there. Now I can kind of almost hear my Indian advisors saying, yeah, we don't do the Mayo Clinic. We do something else. We do other stuff. We go to the Indian school somewhere that, doesn't have a medical school. So I applied. And the day I was to have my interview, I got up. I'm supposed to be in Rochester, Minnesota. We lived in Minneapolis. The morning of my interview, supposed to be like at 9 or 10. I get up like at 5 in the morning. It is 30 degrees below zero outside. Blizzard. I said, well, my wife says, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to get in the car and go. I'm going to just drive a little slower and go. While I'm en route to the Mayo Clinic, they had actually called my home, told me not to come. The interview was canceled because it's too cold to travel. Well, by the time they called, I'm already in the library down there. So I had this was great. You want to see how history works? This is fantastic, okay? Normally you get 20 minutes, 15 minutes interview, then you get passed off to the next dean of academics or whatever. So I get in there, and they go, what are you doing here? I go, well, I have, a 10 o'clock interview. And they said, well, didn't you get the message? Whoa, I didn't have cell phones. We have cell phones. So I said, no, I didn't get any messages. They said, well, come on in. Might as well, you want some coffee, you warm up. And we talked for an hour. And the next dean of medicine, I talked for another hour with that dean. And, it must have put them in a real relaxed mood or something, because there wasn't, I had previous interviews at different medical colleges, and they were kind of the put you on the spot kind of interview. One of the first questions these guys asked was, what took you so long? And I told them the whole story about we Indians don't do the hard sciences. And they kind of chuckled. They said, have you learned the hard sciences yet? I said, yeah, you bet. I got every one of them, and I know how to do them all. And we had 2 hours worth of interviews. And I was so confident. I kind of rolled down the window on the way home. It warmed up a bit. It was now 10 below. And I was singing, and I was just, I was sure I was going to get in. I got an envelope in the mail about 2 weeks later, and it was real skinny. Now, I'd been warned from other people that if you get a skinny envelope, it's rejection because it doesn't have the welcome packet. So I thought, I can't open this because it's a rejection letter. I open it up. First word, congratulations. Ho, ho, ho. Now, let's go back to Levi Elm in 1885. You know how long it took to get from Levi Elm to the Mayo Clinic? 100 years. So I got 100 years and 3 generations of people opening the door to education. Now, at first, it was a rough opening, you'll have to admit. And the understanding of bicultural education wasn't clear. There were a lot of misgivings, there were a lot of missteps, there were a lot of wrongdoings, frankly, in early Indian education. There was the desire to change one's culture, one's attitude, one's religion, one's hair, everything. And it generally didn't work out for the benefit of the Indian students who went to school. By the time my mother went, it was different. It was, we can't destroy the students, we have to minister to the students. And by the time I went to school, if you'll remember, affirmative action was in full play. But I can say quite honestly, and the Mayo Clinic will tell you the same, they no students got in the Mayo Medical School. There's 40 students, there's 4,000 applicants. That's a pretty slim odds. And you don't get in there by virtue of the color of your skin or your culture or your last name. You get in there because you deserve to be there. There's the book. It's not all about Indian history, but it's about my journey in education, ending up a physician, becoming an Army officer, and then my subsequent dealing with stroke, where I actually lost my medical career and then rebuilt my career as a writer.